Beautiful. Hello, everybody.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Fireside Chat. We're super excited to have Ian here. I am pretending to be Max because he just got back from Costa Rica, but we're here to talk about a really important conversation, and it's all about creating powerful agreements. And it's really important not only for work relationships, but personal relationships. So we're really excited that Ian is here and going to share his wisdom with us. So, thank you so much, Ian, for being here. And we would love for you to, first of all, share a little bit about yourself.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ming Ling, and thank you, Max, for having me. So, I'm going to introduce myself in maybe a little bit of a different way than you might be used to. I'm going to tell you who I choose to be. I always take action from love, never from judgment or fear. Slow and smooth is my fastest gear. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be, and so is everyone else. Nobody needs to be saved, and I am not the savior. I am my word. My word is powerful, and my word is magic. I live an extraordinary 10 out of 10 life in all respects, and I assist others on their journey to create the same. I never take anything personally, good or bad, so I honor that everyone is on their own journey. My work and my play are one and the same, for both work and play are expressions of my creative joy. My joy is contagious, and it knows no boundary. Time is infinite, and time is always on my side. I own fully and love deeply the greatness of God that resides within myself and every living being. And my parents named me Ian Bruce Maxwell. It's very nice to meet you all. So I'll share a little bit of biography. I am a digital nomad, world traveler, a coach, and I work in real estate. So I primarily work and serve with like leaders of companies, creators who are working on their own leadership, how they show up in the world. And I am deeply passionate about the NFT, crypto, and AI specifically space. Um, it's separate from the conversation today, but one of my deep passions and interests is learning how does AI work and how can we transform and relate very differently to each other in the world, especially in our education system, using these new tools available to us. I live in Italy. After a couple years of digital nomading, I stopped there for a few months and I met the woman that I'm going to marry. So I've been living in Italy now, and I find myself in Pennsylvania working on some Airbnb projects. Um, and I've been part of the Grateful Giraffe community since I believe of June of 2022 when I got to meet Max at the first NFT NYC event that we all went to together, and have been a very big fan and a big supporter of the work of this community since then. So that's a little bit about me. But before we dive into the content of today's discussion, I would love to invite us all into a just a 2 or 3 minute grounding exercise, kind of set the stage. And if you're driving, you are totally excused from closing your eyes as we go through this. Feel free to relax, feel free to focus on the road. Um, so let's all start by closing our eyes, sit back wherever you find yourself, and just get comfortable for a moment. We're going to start by taking 3 deep and nourishing breaths. And as you breathe, notice the rising and fall of your chest or stomach. Now bring your attention to your feet. Notice the sensation of the ground beneath you. Notice if there's warmth or coolness, or even a little bit of tingling. See if you can find your toes. Wiggle them a little bit if you need to. Now bring your attention to your legs. Feel their weight and feel the sensation of your clothing. Bring your attention to your shoulders. Notice any tension you might be holding there and just breathe deeply and relax. Bring your attention to your head and just feel the weight of your head resting gently on your spine. Now take two fingertips and rub them together, index finger and thumb, very slowly and with such attention that you can feel every single ridge of your fingerprint. Tune into that sensation. Now tune into your sense of hearing. See if you can find the farthest away sound that you can hear. And now find the closest sound that you can hear. If you haven't heard your own breath yet, tune into that. And then when you're ready, very gently and very slowly, you can open your eyes. I welcome you all here today because I know that each and every one of you is a powerful creator. You create relationships. You create something inside of your mission and the work that you do every day. And my commitment to every single one of you is that what we're going to discuss as it relates to what is an agreement, what is an expectation, and how can we mold a path forward. My commitment is that this is going to be a very powerful conversation that we're going to create all together in this room, and it's going to change the rest of your life. So in this fireside chat, I invite us, we're all going to talk together, we're going to create together, we're going to play together, and walk away with something very, very cool at the end. So thank you for jumping in and playing. And before I get started in this, I actually want to give some credit because the things I'm going to share with you is actually based largely on the work of an incredible coach named Steve Chandler, who's explored this topic in great detail. So the good news is very little of this is original. I didn't make this up. This isn't coming out of nowhere. And if you want to learn more about it, there's some wonderful resources with Steve Chandler as well. So I want to start by putting kind of a question to the room at large. I'd love to hear. Oh, thank you, Raheli. Appreciate that. I'd love to hear from each of you when you think of the word expectation. Let's start with that. What comes to mind for you? I'd love to feel free to just come off mute, jump in. When you hear expectation, what does that mean to you?
I feel like it means that you're wanting somebody to do something, so it's control.
Hmm, right. Beautiful.
Self-inflicted wound based on someone else's thoughts.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think of an agreement that's been made or a need that you have either from yourself or someone else.
Mm,
Well, I feel like it's a non-agreement because the other person didn't agree to it yet. It's something
yeah.
that you, on your side only.
Hmm.
It's an unspoken illusion.
Hmm. Yeah.
Want or desire.
Something you want to happen in the future.
Right. Yeah. So I'm going to mirror back some of those words, right? They are unspoken. They're one-sided, right? It exists all on this side of the fence over here. It's usually driven by a want or a desire as it relates to someone else, something else in the world, right? Something outside of us, something we desire to happen for the future. We hear there's control inside of it, right? And I don't know who said it, but I chuckled. Self-inflicted wound. Right? It's yeah, all these are beautiful, right? And immediately when I said expectation, we have all these things that pop into our mind. And of all the things that were said, this is more of a rhetorical question, how many of them give you the warm and fuzzies when you think about them? Right? Now let's contrast that for a moment. And we're going to kind of co-create a little bit of a definition here, and then we'll kind of really dive into the meat of it. But when you think agreement, when you hear that word, again, just come off mute, shout it out. What shows up for you?
Mutual.
Yeah.
Active,
Consensual.
Mm, yes.
I also feel like it's something about like both sides winning because when you come to an agreement, like both sides are taken into account.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, y'all are making my job really easy here today.
Responsibility.
There's responsibility. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. What's the emotional signature of an agreement? Like when you think about it, where does it land for you? How does it feel? Even just when we're playing with that word.
Supportive.
Feels calmer as well. It's like there's no anxiety. It's because it's mutual.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. So I'm going to play back these words. You're in a word cloud. Agreements are mutual, as contrast with an expectation that's one-sided. An expectation just lives on one side of the fence. An agreement is mutual. Expectations are passive. Agreements are active. And somebody said consensual, right? And we'll talk about this more in a minute, but if an agreement, quote unquote, is created through coercion, through, hey, I really need you to agree to this, or I'm going to hang some power dynamic over your head about it, well, that's not consensual. The words might sound like an agreement, but that's not an agreement, right? I think it was Minling who brought up there's a win-win, right? Because it's co-created, there's the opportunity for everyone to benefit and everyone to walk away with something powerful, right? There's responsibility inside of it, right? You're not letting it happen in the outside world or let someone else's expectation happen to you or letting your expectations get on other people. There's responsibility in it. There's supportiveness and there's calmness, right? So even just in the definition we've kind of co-created in the last couple minutes, we can already see that there is a powerful contrast between these two things. I would even be so bold as to say we have two choices in life when it comes to how we relate to other beings. We can either have expectations of them, or we can create agreements. And I'm going to preface this by saying I'm about to drop some hot takes about what agreements and expectations are. So even if I get a little spicy about it as I talk about it, please understand, grain of salt, wink and a nod, right? I'm going to be a little spicy for effect. But expectations by their nature are toxic, and they ruin people's chances at a good relationship with each other. The coach I mentioned earlier, Steve Chandler, he told a very beautiful story that really illustrates this, where he was called to work in with a manufacturing company who was having a lot of productivity breakdowns, right? They were having issues getting product out on time. There were issues with the morale of the people on the line, actually creating the product. And of course, from the leadership perspective in that company, they're like, we got a bunch of lazy, demotivated employees. Mr. Coach, please go in and fix that for us. When really there was an issue at the leadership level that was the outcome. And the people who were in this organization were working really hard trying to live up to the expectations that were put upon them. And they ended up resenting the leaders of the company because their feeling was that the expectations were unreasonable. Leadership wasn't actually connected to the reality of how understaffed they were, how stressed they were. And there was kind of a morale crisis in this organization. So, Steve was, talking to the plant manager, and the plant manager was talking to him about an employee who wasn't living up to expectations. Those were his words. So Steve asks, okay, well, what was the expectation that you had with this gentleman? The plant manager said, well, I had an expectation that this order would be done by Friday because the customer very clearly said that they needed it by Monday. Okay, great. What happened? Well, it wasn't done. The work was not done by Friday. It didn't get done until literally a week later, and the customers was upset. They lost their preferred status. Everything went downhill. Right? So he asked naturally, well, who's in charge of that product being done? Who's responsible for this outcome? And the answer is the supervisor of the plant. So Steve asked the general manager, well, what was your agreement with him? The plant manager was like, what the hell you looked at him like, have you taken a ballet lesson recently? He's like, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean by that? Okay, on the matter of getting it done by Friday, what was your agreement? He was like, well, what? You mean I have to go around making agreements with everybody? He knew I expected it. He got my email. He knew the customer expected it by Monday. He's a goddamn professional. I shouldn't have to be holding his hand. What do you mean make an agreement with him? Right? Here's the thing. People do not look forward to living up to expectations. People rebel against expectations. So Steve said, you know what? Let's bring the foreman in. Let's have a conversation and try this again. And the GM went to the foreman and said, okay, do you agree to have this job done by next Friday? Foreman says, well, I'd sure like to, but I'm understaffed, so I can't promise it for sure. The leader said, well, okay, well, what could you promise for sure? Foreman's like, well, if you brought me one extra person, I could promise it by Friday for sure. If I don't have an extra person, I can promise it by Tuesday for sure. So the leader thought and said, you know what, I'll bring you an extra person. And with an extra person, what can I count on for sure? The foreman said, you know what, you can count on Friday for sure. Give me that extra person, you have it. And they shook hands. They had an agreement, right? Now that is a real agreement, and that is so much stronger than an expectation. And yet most people, most leaders, me, you, every person in this room, we are conditioned from a very, very, very young age to walk around with expectations of people. Is it because we're wrong? No. Is it because we're morally bankrupt? Absolutely not. It is simply what we were exposed to. Our parents had expectations of us, right? Our friends had expectations of us. Our relatives, like our mothers, fathers, preachers, and teachers, they all had expectations of us. And it gets stuff done. So we internalize that. But the problem is they start to create pain. They start to create rebellion. They start to create a desire to distance yourself from it, right? The beauty in conscientiously going around, finding where you have expectations, and consciously choosing to co-author an agreement with somebody is you're taking advantage of the fact that human beings love to keep an agreement that they co-authored with you, right? If you sit down and you work with somebody and ask, what can I count on from you? And allow them to ask you in return for the help they need in order to keep the promise, wonderful things happen. There's magic that happens inside of that process, right? Because you can find out in advance why certain things aren't going to occur. You don't have to fix them later. And you save yourself from having to resent people who don't live up to your expectations, right? I want to bring this up and hear from people if you have something in this that resonates for you. But have you ever been in a situation let's say at work or in a professional situation or a personal one where somebody was asking something of you and you knew it wasn't totally reasonable, you didn't think it was possible, but you were afraid to say something? You kind of just agreed to the expectation the other person had of you, kind of knowing somewhere in the back of your head that either it wasn't going to work or there was going to be a cost for you. Does that resonate? Yeah. We've all been there. We've all been there. Expectations create fear. Like when you know that somebody's expecting something of you, that's a lot of pressure. And oftentimes we're a little afraid to speak up about what our needs are in the face of that expectation, right? But agreements, on the other hand, agreements are creative. You invite somebody into a co-creative process, recreating, negotiating, designing. And that process is actually a lot of fun. Right? When you can let your expectations go out of the room, you get to be in a creative process with someone anytime you choose to step into an agreement with them. Expectations, on the other hand, are stressful. They lead to anxiety, disappointment, even a sense of betrayal. Agreements are courageous. Expectations are not. They're even a little bit cowardly, I would go so far as to say. The beautiful thing inside of an agreement too, and I mentioned this before, people love to keep their word and they hate breaking their word when it's given freely and given powerfully. Even human beings, including criminals. Like, the guy, yeah, I'm sure you've seen the Godfather movies, Honor Among Thieves. They keep their oath because there is no outside structure to enforce the agreement. Like, you are either your word or you are not. There's no acceptable in between, right? The other challenge that comes up if you're a person who walks around with expectations of other people is that in the world of expectations, only two things can happen, and neither of them are good. The first possibility is they do not live up to your expectation. That's no fun. You experience disappointment, at the very least, and maybe even feel betrayed if it was a serious expectation, right? So that's if they don't live up to your expectation. Now, what if they do live up to your expectation? Well, that's a neutral thing. Why would you be happy about it? You expected it, right? All right, so the person showed up for their meeting on time, so what? I expected them to show up on time. So you're putting yourself in a world where you have betrayal and disappointment at worst and neutrality at best. Ugh, that's not fun. That's not joyful. That's not generative. That's not creative, right? Yeah. Yeah, please, Minling, jump in. I'd love to, hear that question spoken out loud to the group.
Yeah. So I have a question. I just wanted to talk about like personal relationships because I think
Yeah.
in business relationships the agreements are a little bit I guess easier because there's not a lot of feelings attached to it. You do the work and then you agree or not agree to do, things for your job and all that stuff. But when it comes to personal relationships, I find that sometimes there needs to be compromise. Like you may not want to do something, but then you feel like you have to do it because you don't want to disappoint the other person. And it's not coming from an expectation place, it's just also trying to balance um, helping your partner as well too. Does that make sense? So
Right.
it's a little bit more tricky or a little bit more gray area. Like, for example, if you promised to go to an event, but then you had a lot of work, and then your partner is expecting you to go to like an event because you both agreed to it originally, and then you feel like you don't have, you just feel overwhelmed and maybe you can't go. Like, how do you create powerful agreements without disappointing the other person when
Mm,
you know that there's also compromises that have to come in relationships?
yeah. Yeah. Well, there's actually a few really important elements to the question you share, right? And I'm going to break them down a little bit if that's all right. One of the elements you talked about is the element of compromise, particularly in the sphere of a personal relationship. And I think you hit the nail on the head where compromise is actually a really important part of that process. And in the space of consciously saying, let's make an agreement together, that's where you get to kind of make the compromises in an active and explicit way, right? Because even if some of what the other partner needs is coming from an expectation, when you invite them into a conversation around compromise, you can actually give them the opportunity to voice what it is and for you to voice what you need. So even just that exercise, I think to your point, takes things out of the world of, okay, this is hiding in the background and the subtext of my side and your side and making it explicit to some degree. So, I think that honoring the compromise that's inside of that is a very important element. Um, but then there was the other element you talked about, which was avoiding to disappoint the other person. Is that something that would you be open to elaborating a little bit on that, like how that shows up for you in this realm?
Um, for this example, it's actually the opposite. So it
Oh,
feels like
okay.
I had the more of like the expectation, and the person didn't want to disappoint me because it was a very important event that like we both said, okay, we're gonna go to. And things change. I get it. It's just it on the expectation side. It's almost like since we agreed to it, you were looking forward to it. So, and then it didn't happen. And so that's where it gets a little wonky. And then from the other side, the disappointment was like, I feel like it was coming from not wanting to hurt me. So that's, wanting to do the best that you can for the person that you care about. So that's where I was just curious about
Yeah.
how do you compromise, because on the one hand, it was a very important event that we agreed to go to, and like so I'm trying not to have expectations, but at the same time when you agree to it and the things change, like how do
Mm,
you navigate that without having the expectation,
yeah.
having both partners feel good about the situation? I think that's where things get a little sticky.
Mm, yeah. That's a really good point, right? Because anytime you're in co-creation with somebody, there is no way to avoid running the risk of someone else's experience of it. If they fear disappointing you, in a sense, what they're fearing is not meeting an expectation you have of them, and vice versa, right? And in the realm of the making and keeping of agreements, there it makes a huge difference in helping to avoid disappointment or avoid breakdowns that are part of expectations. But at the same time, those can still happen. An agreement can help, but it's not going to be a panacea against, someone's experience of disappointment in either direction, right? And sometimes, because when it comes to agreements, you can make agreements with other people, but you can't route out other people's expectations. Working with expectations is a personal game. You can only ever have control over or awareness of your own, right? Just like how expectations exist only on one side of the fence and agreements exist on both. That's a key part of it. But then the other element of what you shared was this question of, well, we've created an agreement up front that we would be attending this together because it was important, and then the agreement shifts later. Like, what do you do with that, right? And you've actually touched on a really important element of what an agreement needs to be in order to be functional. An agreement needs to be a powerful commitment, but if an agreement is like a steel cage, if it's like whoa, I've given my word and there is no changing, there's no backing out of it, there's no creating a new agreement, that's like it's super glue. That runs into its own unique set of challenges too, right? So an essential part of being able to make and keep agreements is also knowing that you have the right to readdress or renegotiate an agreement prior to the time in which it was supposed to be fulfilled. So if I was to give an example, or using hey, we're agreeing to attend an event together. If the significant person calls you up, like 10 minutes after the event started and says, hey, about that event, sorry, I'm just swamped, I can't do it, I'm not going to be able to show up. Well, the time has passed in which you agreed for the thing to happen. They're out of integrity with that agreement. If, a day before, 2 days before, they say, hey, I agreed to attend the event, and I'd like to create the agreement with you that I'm not going to be attending the event, and here's why. If you do it prior to the time it's supposed to be fulfilled, you have the right to come to the table and renegotiate that agreement. That needs to be an essential part of the way agreements work. It's powerful and it's negotiable before the time it was fulfilled. Now, the thing is, you also have to accept the fact that in the renegotiation of an agreement, the other person's going to feel how they're going to feel about it. They might be totally down to play. They could be disappointed. They could say, screw you. I don't want to be friends anymore. Those are all possibilities, right? And part of the power of being in agreement is also accepting and letting other people feel how they're going to feel about it while still coming from a place of honoring them, right? But we can't expect them to not be disappointed, expect them to love the renegotiation agreement, expect people to receive it. They're going to receive it how they receive it. And the more trust you have inside that relationship, the more buffer you kind of have around what the impacts might be of needing to renegotiate an agreement that you've created. I know I've shared a couple things around that, but I'm curious if that to some degree speaks to the heart of your question, or if there's other clarification we could play with here.
I think it does. It's nuanced. Everything is nuanced. So, but for the most part, it does. So, thank you.
Of course. So I actually want to open this up a little bit to the rest of the group and just take a minute. I want to invite you to take a moment to think about a recent issue that you had. Again, you can choose whether it's in a business context or personal context. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an agreement related issue immediately in your mind, but I'd love to hear from maybe two people, an example of just something that's present in your life that came to mind where you were disappointed with how something went, or there was a mismatch in terms of an output, right? And I'd love to take a moment just to kind of explore that for fun in kind of putting this at play in real life examples, if anyone's open to sharing.
I'll share. I'm thinking about this as I was listening to Min Ling. I think what was coming up for me was like we have these like punctual agreements, and then also like the main agreement, right? So like with a partner, the agreement is like I will respect and love you in this partnership, and then moving forward, whatever the little things are. And for me, it's been an agent who we entered an agreement to have him be my agent and me be the artist. And I feel like he's not like doing his end of the bargain. And so I've been contemplating having that conversation, which feels difficult because I'm trying to navigate if it's an expectation or if it's a breach of an agreement. It feels like a breach of an agreement to me. So yeah, that's what's coming up.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Abby. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, because I hear you kind of playing with it. I'm like, well, what was the agreement? What was the expectation? There's a little bit of like, where did it fall? But if you were to like play with like, what was your agreement? Like the explicit agreement created with between you two? What was the nature of the agreement?
I mean, again, I think there's actually like a contract of like, party X will do their best to procure, work and bookings for, whatever. But yeah, I'm kind of questioning that. I'm like, did I need to say something more explicitly when we, agreed to work together of things that I wanted or things that I needed? And kind of just, yeah, I feel like it was kind of general. It was kind of just like, let's work together. And I think that I'm like, yeah, how do I renegotiate the agreement? Or, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful, beautiful question. And I think you brought up something that's probably going to resonate for a lot of folks here. So you gave the example that it was kind of a bit of a general umbrella, like, okay, we're agreeing to work together. We're agreeing that he's going to do his best to bring in business, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of times what we think is an agreement is actually a container for a whole bunch of expectations that kind of sit on other side outside of the agreement.
Mhm.
Because you probably have a set of definitions in your mind as to what you expect would come from working together. Like, hey, you're actually going to bring me business.
Mhm.
And I think the first step, if I were to provide a little bit of advice or just to kind of play with the situation, is this is for everyone. If you're like, damn, I walked in with expectations, I didn't make a clear agreement, it's my fault. No, it's not your fault. Start with like gentle, kind curiosity, like, okay, this nothing wrong with me, nothing wrong with the other person. The issue here is just we don't have clear agreements as a neutral fact. That takes off a ton of weight. Takes off a lot of weight for you because you don't have to be like, I screwed up. And it takes off weight for the other person because if you're bringing the disappointment, resentment of, they didn't meet my expectation, it's harder to actually sit down and create an agreement with them. So this is such a beautiful opportunity and exercise to say, hey, I noticed there's a disconnect here. I'd love to create some clear agreements to you as to what the nature of this relationship is. That's a beautiful and healthy and good conversation to have with anybody at any time, right? And one thing that you brought up, I think, is important too in terms of the difference between agreement and expectation is agreements, from my definition, for what it's worth, can only ever be about actions, about steps that you agree to take, not about outcomes necessarily. So, for example, if you're a romantic relationship with a partner, you can't say, I need you to agree to make me happy. Nobody can agree for you to be happy, but we can agree to speak to each other with respect. We can agree to listen first and then be heard second. We can agree to a million actions that support being happy in the relationship, but you can't agree to being happy in the relationship. So, in this specific situation with this gentleman you're working with professionally, you may not be able to have him agree. I need you to agree to bring me in $10,000 a month in new income, but you can create some very specific agreements around what are his specific responsibilities and actions he is taking, and how you would measure and create accountability around that. You know, so that's one piece. The second one is in the agreement creation. You also have the opportunity to talk about what they need from you in order to fulfill their promise, right? And again, I don't know the nature of the relationship, but maybe there are things that he could use from you in order to fulfill his end of the bargain that he's not asking for because he had an expectation. Well, Abby should just know that I need this. And if she's not giving it to me, well, she's one of the, right? There's all kinds of pernicious stuff that can be hiding in the corner there. So responsibly, like what can I do on my side to support you in fulfilling your end of the bargain and what we're agreeing to can be a very powerful way to kind of upgrade the relationship, you know?
Yeah, I love everything you're saying. I think the issue is resentment has already set in to an extent where I'm like, is it worth trying to renegotiate this agreement, or is it just kind of like a respectfully like end it and then start better the next time?
Yeah. Yeah. And that is completely at your discretion. And you can even throw it all away and create a new agreement with the same person.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can say, hey, let's start from the ground up. Let's
Mm.
create a new agreement together. Or you could be like, well, this is not the person I want to work with. That's fine. You can walk away from that
Right.
and then create that agreement with the next person. But in either case, whatever you do, there's no getting it wrong because you get to practice and you get to play and you get to see what comes of it.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
As we bring on Erica in a minute, Max had a follow-up question. His question was, why can't create an agreement that's outcome related? Isn't outcome more important than actions when it comes to business? And then we'll bring on Erica.
Yeah. That's an awesome question. Right. Because
Amen.
I'll acknowledge, briefly kind of the wisdom inside of this is as a leader, you are accountable for creating outcomes. Outcomes are what drives business. Outcomes are what essentially makes the world go round. And this is a place where I like to create a little bit of a distinction between two things, and we can always unpack this further, right? An agreement is around actions. I agree to do this, to behave in this way, to be here at this time, around all things that you could measure in that respect and take ownership for. When I think about outcomes, the word that I kind of use to associate with that world is a commitment, right? So I'll give kind of an example, and Max, feel free to jump in. We can play a little bit with this too. But let's say you're working in a sales organization, right? You're doing enterprise software sales, and your boss says to you, I need you to agree to close $50,000 in business this month. Well, I cannot agree to close $50,000 of business, but here's what I can agree to. I can agree to having, moving the ball forward with these 10 prospects and doing 50 cold calls a day and taking all of these measurable actions that will support that outcome. That's an agreement that can be made around it. Now, for me, as the salesperson, I can create a commitment. I am committed to creating $50,000 in, I can be personally committed to creating $50,000 in revenue, but that's something that relates to myself. I can speak to my boss and say, I am committed to our success here. I'm committed to creating that. But what I'm agreeing to is to take these actions in line with that commitment. It's a little bit of a nuance, right? But it's, as a boss, if you're expecting an outcome from somebody without creating an agreement as to what's going to happen to do that, you miss out on the opportunity to actually support them and find out what structures are needed, right?
Awesome. Thank you. Actions or agreements equals actions and outcomes equals commitment. That's
And
amazing.
I'll share one little nuance in that. Thank you too. A commitment from somebody else put on you is an expectation. I need you to be committed to creating $50,000. Nope. Only I can create a commitment to something. Nobody can be committed for me or tell me what to be committed to. Because then it's just another expectation that I'm chasing and trying to fulfill, and we get caught in that cycle. And again, I say this with a little bit of a wink and a nod, because as I share these definitions, these distinctions, these ideas, big old asterisk that this is not universal truth. I'm not speaking to you something that is, all the great masters have agreed. No. These are truths and perspectives that have high utility. But they are not universally true in the same way. If I drop my cup, it's going to hit the floor. That's a different kind of truth. So the invitation for any of these definitions, any of these ideas, is actually don't take my word for it. Don't be like, well, that's just how it is. It's actually an invitation to play a game called, okay, let's look for all the places in my life where I have expectations. How many of them can I replace with an agreement? See what happens. See what works, see what doesn't. And you might find that there's something magical that happens for you. And if in another circumstance it doesn't work, throw it out the window and try something else. There's no getting it wrong inside of this, right? I'm sorry, go ahead, Mindy.
No, thank you. We just have Erica. She'll be our last question for today. But Erica, go ahead and share your question and your situation.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks, Max. This is a really good conversation. And I think thinking about these topics in a new way is like heavy in a very good way, in the sense that I want to keep thinking about it. I have a question, and I don't think it necessarily relates to like personal or professional life, but I think as the person with expectations maybe that are set upon us, sometimes like our own enthusiasm over something can have us wash over maybe what the expectations or agreements that we make are. And so I think about, you're talking about enterprise sales. I'm an enterprise salesperson. We just got our quotas. They're high this year, and mine is not signed yet. And the question is like, how do we sort of, ease on the brakes a little bit to ensure that when we are, making an agreement, we are doing it with our full selves, with our consciousness, committing to something that we feel really strongly about, rather than letting maybe some premature enthusiasm have us enter into an expectation situation where, we can't really deliver on what the results are. So I'm looking at it more from like that side of the coin. Would love your thoughts.
Yeah, beautiful question. Thank you so much. So if I was to just play that back briefly to ensure alignment there, what it sounds like is you're describing a situation where, something is placed before you that there's actually some excitement about, and there's like this momentum to say, well, yes, of course, right? And it might be a situation where the reality is maybe there's some more stuff you need, or maybe there's some agreement that could be created, but
Yeah.
there's a little bit of like internal pressure or maybe external expectation to kind of jump into it and say, all right, yeah, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
So the question is kind of like, how do you slow that down a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do an infuriating coach thing.
Okay, go
And
for it.
actually, I want to turn that question back to you.
Yeah.
For you in your world, knowing who you are, what you do, how you tend to operate, because you already have a situation in mind,
Hmm.
how do you slow things down a little bit?
I love that. So I don't, for me personally, this isn't as much of an issue in my professional life. Like I feel like, I'm pretty clear at this point on seeing what the expectations might be, reading them back. I'm going to commit to this process, and then we're going to revisit this as a check-in point to say, initially we thought X was possible. As it turns out, we need more time or resources or XYZ. How can we work together to make that happen? I think that's a step I've been able to do. Maybe where I don't see it as much is a little bit more on the personal side. So I'm like laughing at the initial question about, the event, somebody agrees to go to it with you. And then it doesn't happen. Like, how do we communicate maybe to loved ones more necessarily if we can't make those agreements? Because I think that's where like the emotional pain can live a little bit. It's a lot harder to do it when it's not analytical,
Mm, yeah,
at least for me. I'll own my part in that. For me, it's a little tougher.
yeah, absolutely. I think, and you've brought up, actually, this is if we had another hour, this is a total rabbit hole we'd go down to. But I made an
Mm,
agreement with Min Ling, we'd end on the hour, so that's precisely what we will do. But to your point, when it comes to like, how do you navigate it in a situation where it's more personal, and there is a whole maybe 10 years worth of little expectations built up, right? And this is a place where sharing the reason why you would like to make that agreement can be very powerful.
mm,
So I'll give you an example, and it's a business one, but you can take this and apply it in a personal setting too.
okay.
Like if you were running a meeting and somebody was showing up consistently late to that meeting, the expectations route would be like, dude, you keep showing up late. You're a professional. I expect you to be on time. Can you do that? That's the expectations way to do it. The agreement is, hey, I'd like to ask for your agreement to show up on time every time. This is the reason for it. You're not doing anything wrong, but showing up late simply doesn't work. It simply doesn't work for what I'm creating, right? Your
Mhm.
your input, your participation in this process is so valuable to me and the rest of the team that to not have you there for the whole time simply doesn't work. So I'd like to create an agreement with you to show up on time every time. Can we do that? And then they might say, well, listen, I have this other meeting that tends to go over right behind this, and I'm rushing from this one to that one, and I hit the head, and right.
Yeah.
And that's good information because now you know what's standing in their way of upholding the agreement,
Hmm.
and you can actually go support them. Like maybe you need to talk to their boss that's running the other meeting and create an agreement with them so they can uphold their agreement with you.
Yeah.
And that could play in a personal side too, where you can say, hey, listen, I'd like to create an agreement with you that we operate this way. Not because what you're doing is wrong, simply because here's why this is important and here's why I want to create this with you. Is that possible? Can we play with that? And now you've invited them into a dialogue of co-creation around it. So
Mm, thank you. I love that.
yeah, you're welcome. I'll share this last little tidbit because this connects with that idea, and then I'll wrap up, I promise. You can even create agreements about keeping agreements. Hey, I noticed we made an agreement to do this and that hasn't been upheld. Can we create an agreement to keep our agreements we make together? And then if that's a problem, well, that doesn't mean they're a bad person or you hate them or anything like that, but maybe being in a relationship, professional or otherwise, with them simply doesn't work for you. Because if you can't have an agreement to keep agreements, then it doesn't make them a bad person, but that's just not a functional relationship for what you want to create there. So that's okay too. And I'll leave it at that so we can kind of do our wrap up all together here.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Like I think everybody got so much value out of this. Everybody's been saying that they love this talk, and so we really appreciate you sharing with us the distinction between agreements and expectations. I think everybody learned something new, and then also have new tools for the toolbox. So thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your wisdom for today's fireside chat.
Thank you. Much love to you all. Thank you for having me. What a joy.
Thank
And
you.
we'll be in touch.
Bye, everyone.
Next week.
Thank you.
Or no,
Bye-bye.
we're going to see everybody in person next week, and our other one, next one online will be the following week. So we will talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.